Rasputin did not change his undergarments nor touch any part of his body for years at a time during his pilgrimages. Like many other religious wanderers at this time, Grigory Rasputin believed that humiliating oneself was a great test of your personal resolve and your attachment to earthly pleasures. A more common way to humiliate yourself was to wear fetters, which Grigory also did for 3 entire years, and to deprive yourself of food and water for days at a time. Watch the first video on this playlist to understand more about his life before he became a wandering pilgrim. But one of the main reasons he began to travel in poverty was because he had an intense curiosity to learn things that were beyond the teachings his small Siberian village could provide. I was interested in everything, good and bad. I had questions, but there was no one to ask. He later wrote in his book, The Life of an Experienced Pilgrim, during his travels, he became rather fascinated with the elder holy men he encountered along the way, particularly those who were sought after as spiritual guides after gaining a lifetime of wisdom primarily by living in total solitude. He met some of Orthodoxy's most famous holy men during this period of his life, and every couple of years he'd bring his newfound knowledge back home to his wife, children, and parents in the small Siberian village he was born in. When he arrived to meet his family, it was always on a whim and a total surprise. His favorite season in his village was spring, so oftentimes he'd stay for just that time period, then once again leave his family to wander all throughout Russia. But as the years passed, Grigory was gaining a reputation within the religious community in his region. Though he was illiterate, Grigory had an excellent memory and could recite religious texts from memory, and then pair it with personalized wisdom to cater to the person whose company he was in. Through meeting thousands of people in his travels, Grigory began to acquire the ability to read people quite well, to see inside them, what troubles they had in the past. Eventually, when he would return home to his village, people from the surrounding areas began seeking him out for religious counsel. The Rasputin family began housing religious pilgrims in the courtyard of their home who were passing through to meet with Grigory, and his wife Praskovia would feed these religious wanderers. The more the Rasputins showed hospitality towards these pilgrims, and the more Grigory offered his advice, the more popular their house became as a religious destination. And this ultimately led to Grigory gaining a small following of acolytes, 2 male family members, and 3 female peasants from nearby towns. Initially, Grigory and this small group would gather on Sundays to recite Bible verses, which Grigory would then elaborate on and interpret. But after some time of this routine, Grigory dug a crude cave under the horse stables of the Rasputin family home, so that the group could use it as a chapel for their meetings. And as I'm sure you can imagine, Grigory's village of around 1,000 people began to talk. There were rumors that 2 of the women who attended these meetings would often bathe Grigory in some sort of bathhouse. There were reports of strange songs and mystic rituals coming from the cave he dug, and people began to say that during his wanderings, Grigory had been sleeping with countless amounts of young women. Though these whisperings had a negative ripple effect within his village, they had the opposite effect throughout the rest of Siberia. He was gaining popularity with each passing day, and when he was around 35 years old, Grigory gained one of his first very wealthy followers, a recent widow named Bashmakova, who began bringing Grigory on her own travels throughout the region. Bashmakova was deeply grieving, and Grigory's prayers and bits of wisdom brought her great comfort. It was her who brought Grigory to the Siberian city of Kazan, and she started introducing him into very influential and affluent circles of merchants and holy men. By this time, Rasputin was referring to himself as a starets, and was going by the name Brother Grigory. He spoke for anyone who would listen, and often told people that he'd acquired the gift of prophecy, the ability to know a person's past and future, simply by looking at them through fasting and prayer. Many people in Kazan were completely taken by him, including the Father Superior of the 7 Lakes Monastery, Gavril. Gavril was one of Grigory's earliest supporters, and fully believed that Rasputin had the ability to read minds. But the same stories that were circulating about Grigory in his hometown also began surfacing in Kazan. That Grigory often had suspicious meetings alone with women, that he often took women into bathhouses with him, and that he lured young women away from their families. Grigory allegedly confessed some of these sins to Gavril, but said that all of his actions were out of love. And though Gavril believed him, just like many other early supporters of Rasputin, Gavril eventually turned on the self-proclaimed starets, saying that Rasputin was no different than a spider. Kill him and God will forgive 40 of your sins. While in Kazan, Grigory began to dream of building a church in his home village of Pokrovskoye. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not get wealthy Siberians to donate money for it. He figured he might have to go to one of the only cities in Russia he had not yet ventured into, the capital itself, St. Petersburg. An unkempt, scraggly-looking peasant, Grigory said he was almost immediately harassed by city police the moment he stepped foot in the capital, causing him to run to the back gate of the Alexander Nevsky Lavra Monastery, where he said he was then struck to the ground by the doorman. On his hands and knees. Grigory said he then began explaining his situation to the doorman, who was moved by his story. He was so moved, in fact, that he ran to fetch Bishop Sergei, who called Grigory inside and talked to him at length. From that moment on, Sergei became Grigory's patron and introduced him to the city's most influential people. And soon, Sergei even presented Grigory to Tsar Nicholas himself. Upon hearing Grigory's request, the Tsar granted Rasputin the money he needed for his church, and Grigory returned home filled with joy. Except that's not what happened at all. This is a perfect example of how full of shit this guy was. That was Grigory's romanticized version of what happened when he got to St. Petersburg. What actually happened is the vicar of the Kazan diocese, Bishop Chrysanth, personally wrote a letter of recommendation for Grigory before he left, addressed to Bishop Sergei. And actually, Bishop Sergei is one of the few men who met Grigory early on who was not impressed by him at all. Sergei only met with Rasputin that one time out of respect for Chrysanth, introduced him to some important people, namely his seminary colleague Feofan, then never met with Grigory ever again. Sergei was absolutely not Grigory's patron, nor did he present him to Tsar Nicholas II. Regardless, through Sergei, Grigory got the societal in he needed. And somewhere between late autumn of 1904 and spring of 1905, Rasputin began entering elite circles in St. Petersburg. And soon he would find himself in the company of the royal couple themselves. In my next video, I'll be diving into the last Romanov rulers, Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra, and how both of them were highly susceptible to joining cults long before they'd even heard the name Grigory Rasputin. I learned all of this in this book, Rasputin by Douglas Smith, and as always, thank you so much for watching.